Aloha, everybody. This is meteorologist Drew Davis coming to you live from the H&N Digital Center. Right now, we're taking a live look outside across, this is Punch Bowl. We are waiting right now for the Central Pacific Hurricane Center to release their forecast for the 2024 Central Pacific Hurricane Center. I'm joined by Guy Hoggy. We want to give you a little bit of insight before this press conference starts, just talking a little bit about what we saw last year and the years before.
Yeah, we've been relatively quiet in terms of direct hits, but we know what happened with last year with regard to the Maui fire and with regard to how that was related to, a hurricane. So yeah, very important stuff ahead.
Yeah, and especially as we're exiting an El Nino year, going into a La Nina, it may be a little bit quieter, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't see a strong storm. All it takes is one storm. So let's take a look at what we're expecting going forward. Here's a look at the forecast. We don't have the numbers just quite yet. That's what we're waiting for from the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. Last year, we actually had we have an average around 4 to 5 each year. And last year, we had 4 storms in the Central Pacific Hurricane, in the Central Pacific Basin. And then, Guy, do you want to take a look at some of the actual storms that we had last year?
Now, remember, cyclones include tropical depressions, tropical storms, as well as hurricanes in all of their strengths. So we classify a cyclone coming into our region as any one of those. So we had Tropical Storm Calvin, and again, we did not get any direct hits last year, so that was good. Calvin got pretty close to the Big Island, though, and this was the big one that really caused, directly impacted Maui. Created those very strong and powerful winds. So this is major hurricane
Dora.
Yes. Right. So and these are only the ones that passed into the Central Pacific, west of 140 West, right? And everything else just didn't make it in from the East Pacific. But there were a couple more.
This is Tropical Storm Greg, which was way south of the islands. It was a similar setup to what we saw with Dora, however, with its weaker a low-pressure center. We didn't see as strong of winds. I remember we were seeing wind gusts over Maui around 60 to 70 miles per hour, but that wasn't a similar story with Greg. And then we also saw at the very end of the season Tropical Depression 12E. I believe this was around September 16th through the 18th. So we only saw 4 move into the Central Pacific Hurricane, or the basin. And here's just a look at what we've seen over the past couple of years. El Nino typically means that we have a very active season. We only saw 4 storms from El Nino this past year, but if we take a look at past El Ninos, 2015 and 2016 was very active. 16 cyclones in the Central Pacific Basin in 2015 alone, 7 in 2016, 6 in 2018, and 4 in 2019. And La Nina years are much quieter, and we're entering a La Nina pattern soon, right, guys?
Yeah, so that's good news. In fact, I think they classified it as neutral already, going from a very warm equatorial Pacific waters into neutral, and then slightly cooler as we head into La Nina. Now, El Nino, right? Warmer equatorial waters means more fuel for those storms, those cyclones, and that's why we see heightened activity. And remember, those also creates different conditions during the winter time, extreme winter surf. So that was a very memorable season, that season between 2015 and 2016, and pretty much the same, but not quite as good in the following El Nino years. So it's good news for us in that we're going to see the equatorial waters kind of cool off.
Yeah, absolutely. But just a reminder, it only takes one storm for it to be an active year. One storm impacting an island could cause serious damage. Just because we're expecting less activity doesn't mean that a strong storm couldn't develop. Here's a quick look at the cyclone names in the Central Pacific. The name that will start off this year is Hone, and we're going to see the rest of this list going forward. And then also, here's a quick look at some of the Eastern Pacific.
Before we get to that group, the Central Pacific names, remember, they are of Hawaiian origin.
Yes.
That's because these storms in the Central Pacific with Hawaiian names are born in the Central Pacific. And the Eastern Pacific, they're born in the Eastern Pacific, and they could die out. They actually have to go below tropical depression and then cross into the Central Pacific before being renamed.
Yes.
Right. Otherwise, they'll carry that name that you see here all the way into the Central Pacific if they make that strength and that long trek.
And it seems like we are about to start the presser at the National Weather Service. We're going to send it over to the forecasters there at the Central Pacific Hurricane Center.
I'd also like to thank the University of Hawaii, the IT Center for their hosting us in here, and especially to the Atmospheric Sciences Department, in particular Alex Lee, who made this possible for us to have this here on campus again. It's a little hard to get ready for hurricane season when it seems the wet season just doesn't want to let go. To talk about the recap of the last wet season and the outlook for the coming dry season, I'd like to introduce our senior service hydrologist, Kevin Kodama.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Looking back to October at the start of the wet season, things were a lot different from what they are now. Back then, we had severe drought in portions of all 4 counties in the state, and we even had extreme drought, which is the D3 category on the U.S. Drought Monitor map, portions of Maui and the Big Island. The last wet season was influenced by an El Nino event that was in the process of intensifying and eventually became a strong level event that peaked late last year and is right now starting to weaken or in the process of weakening. So that had a controlling or it played a big role in determining the rainfall that happened during the last wet season. So with that in mind, the forecast called for below average rainfall during the October through April wet season, and that's consistent with what you would normally expect during an El Nino wet season condition. And that was also consistent with the dynamical models that we had, our guidance that we look at. But the reality was the rainfall totals that by the end of April, we ended up with near to below average rainfall at most locations, but it was not quite as dry as it was anticipated. So, it's one of those things where, when you think have a pretty good handle on the situation, our forecast at the time, we had a high level of confidence, and you think you got things under control and you know what's going on, Mother Nature comes around and says, no, you don't. And so as a recap of what happened during the wet season, October and even into the mid part of November was actually pretty dry. We had below average rainfall during that period across at most areas of the state. And then from November through January, we had several rain events that occurred that kind of took the edge off drought, mitigated some of the drought impacts, and kind of brought some relief to the state, even though those events weren't what you would normally expect out of an El Nino event, and especially a strong El Nino event. And then February and March came around and things dried out again. And so this is at the time of the wet season where I felt like, see, I told you, it was, here's the dryness. And we actually had severe drought start to pop up again on portions of Maui and then the Big Island. And then mid-April, right at the tail end of the wet season, you think things should start calming down. And then we had a big mid-month heavy rain event. In fact, for some places in South Kauai, it ended up producing a record rainfall for the month of April, and quite a bit of flooding on the south side of that island. And so we had wet conditions from Kauai to Molokai, but it's still, that rainfall never quite reached the east half of the state completely, and so we still had some dry conditions in Maui and the Big Island. And so drought persisted on those parts of the state. So looking at the numbers for the wet season, overall we ended up with the 10th driest wet season in the last 30 years. So right on the edge of the dry category. But quite honestly, we thought it was going to be a lot worse. I wouldn't have been surprised if it going at the start of the wet season that we ended up with a top 5 driest wet season, but it didn't end up that way. So we ended up with the 10th driest wet season, and looking at the different islands, Kauai ended up having most areas with near to above average rainfall. Lihue Airport had near average, was right in the middle, it was like 14th wettest in the last 30 years. Oahu had near to below average rainfall totals in a lot of areas. Honolulu Airport had its 10th driest wet season in the last 30 years. And the picture is a lot different in the first half of May, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Maui County, most totals were near average, maybe near to slightly below average. Kahului Airport had its 11th driest wet season in the last 30 years. Molokai Airport had its 7th driest wet season. And on the Big Island, the windward areas, about 50 to 80% of average. And then the rest of the Big Island, most of the totals were definitely in the below average category. Hilo Airport ended up with the 7th driest wet season in the last 30 years. So looking forward for the May through September dry season, right now we have probabilities favoring La Nina developing. So El Nino's, as I mentioned, is in the process of weakening, and that'll transition quickly into a La Nina event. And that La Nina, once it develops, is expected to persist into the early part of next year, which is what you would expect. That's perfectly normal. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, their forecast probabilities favor below average precipitation for the rest of the dry season. I have to stress the rest of the dry season. And this is also consistent with the climate models that we look at, the climate consensus of those climate models. So the big caveat, as I just mentioned, is that the dry season totals will be skewed mainly because of the rainfall that we just had in the first half of this month. We just ended the latest Kona low that we've seen in over 20 years. And, you know, as an example of what it did, you know, the May rainfall at Honolulu Airport through yesterday was 4.90 inches. And that is already past the average rainfall for May through September at that location. So we're already just right out the gate, we're above average at Honolulu Airport. But the rest of the dry season, our guidance is that we're looking at below average rainfall totals through the remainder of the dry season. And so this is also consistent with what you would expect for the summer during a developing La Nina event, and also consistent with our climate model guidance that we're seeing. So what does that mean? So for many areas of the state, the April and May rainfall that we've had should help delay the onset of significant drought. What I mean by significant would be severe or D2 category on the U.S. Drought Monitor map. The exception, a couple of big exceptions here. One is the leeward slopes of Haleakala and Maui, and also the interior section of the Big Island, because these two areas never quite got the full amount of that spring rainfall, and so they're still in severe drought right now. There are pockets of those two areas that are still considered to be D2 on the U.S. Drought Monitor map, so they're already in drought, and things should continue to get worse as we move along in the coming weeks and months. Impacts, once drought starts to develop, and they're expected to primarily or most significantly impact non-irrigated agriculture and water systems that depend on surface water diversion. So we're talking about places like upcountry Maui, and any residents that are on water catchment systems. So they'll be feeling impacts of the drought first, or the earliest, and also will have the most severe impacts as the drought goes on. Because of the late wet season rainfall, significant wildfire risk, and what I mean by significant is, you know, big ignitions and runaway ignitions, they're not expected to develop until perhaps later in what we would normally expect, which would be normal is usually late July into early August, and this may not occur until later on in the summer. Again, the couple of exceptions would be those areas I mentioned, so leeward slopes of Haleakala and also the interior section of the Big Island. And so that's all I had. We have some online links to maps for your reference if you're interested. These have a breakout of the wet season rainfall by island, and also the percent of average map that you see on the screen there. That's also available on the links in the media advisory. And so that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And for everyone here, we have hard copies of the Season Outlook media advisories that we're referencing, and it'll also be sent out afterwards for everybody to have PDF copies as well. And next, I'd like to bring up James Barros, Administrator of Hawaii Emergency Management Agency.
Thanks, John. As we're getting ready to present the Governor's Proclamation on Hurricane Preparedness Week, preparedness is all of our business, starting with the individuals to their families, building in the neighborhood and communities. Every state department and agency is in the business of preparedness. With our partners in the county, with our federal partners from the National Weather Service and the Coast Guard and our FEMA friends, to our businesses, to our nonprofits, we all have a stake in this preparedness. And this year, it feels very much like a Kako thing as we're getting ready for this preparedness hurricane season. So I'd like to read the Governor's Proclamation. Whereas hurricanes are one of nature's most powerful and destructive forces on Earth, and whereas the destructive potential of hurricanes present widespread threats of wind, heavy rain, damaging surf, land and coastal flooding, lightning, and tornadoes that may accompany these powerful storms both directly in the path of the storm or hundreds of miles within the wake of the storm. And whereas Hurricane Dora, while hundreds of miles away from Maui, still contributed to the massive August 8, 2023 wildfires in West Maui that claimed 101 lives, destroyed large portions of Lahaina and Kula, and displaced thousands of people and businesses. And whereas hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th in Hawaii, and whereas Hawaii and its people must always be vigilant to these weather events and be aware, educated, and ready to take action when storms develop in the Pacific Ocean. And whereas while Hurricane Dora did not directly hit Hawaii, it reminds us that it only takes one storm to change your life, your family, and your community. And whereas before this year's hurricane season begins, the state of Hawaii encourages everyone to be aware of their vulnerabilities of hurricane hazards and develop an emergency plan and have 2 weeks ready of emergency supplies to ensure the safety of ourselves and our loved ones. Therefore, Josh Green, Governor of the state of Hawaii, do hereby proclaim May 19th to 25, 2024 as Hurricane Preparedness Week. Signed, Josh Green, Governor, State of Hawaii. Sir. Thank you. Thank you.
All disasters start locally with neighbors helping neighbors. That's especially true here in Hawaii, where the culture helps us develop tight-knit communities. We might think of looking out for our vulnerable neighbors when we think of the kapuna next door who might not drive anymore, or the person across the street with limited mobility who needs help getting around. We might not think of somebody who isn't a native English speaker and who might not understand what's coming when we say hurricane warning. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce Afirak Bamrangaran, the Executive Director of the Office of Language Access, to talk about that aspect of neighbors helping neighbors. AP?
Thank you, John. Aloha all. My name is Afirak Bamrangaran, Executive Director for the Office of Language Access. Thank you for allowing me to participating in today's press conference. And as well as everyone knows, living in Hawaii, we are no stranger to the beauty and the power of nature. However, with this beauty comes with the responsibility for us to be prepared for severe weather, including the upcoming hurricane season. As we prepare ourselves and our family, we must also extend our efforts to our neighbors, particularly for those who do not use English as their primary language, or we call them limited English proficiency individual, because they are among the most vulnerable population in our state. English proficiency, or the lack thereof, significantly impact people's safety and wellness, putting them at risk in situations where they are unable to understand written or verbal warning about the dangerous condition, or prepare themselves for impending severe weather, respond to appropriate to emergency warning, and communicate during the emergencies. You know, in our Aloha state, we are the most culturally diverse state in the nation, and according to the U.S. Census, about 1 in 4 of our population speak non-English at home, and about 1 in 9 of our population, what we call them limited English proficiency, because they have limited in understanding, reading, speaking English languages. And also, a significant number of the visitors to Hawaii also use the language, also use another language than English in their communication. So it is possible that your neighbors or your community or your friends are LEP or limited English proficiency. So as a good neighbor, what can we do? How can we help them during this hurricane season? It might be just a few simple steps that we can all take some action to help our neighbor. First, get to know them, get to know your neighbors, make an effort to meet them. It might be a little bit difficult at first because you do not speak the same languages, but I strongly believe that a good interaction or a good conversation could go a long way, could open a line of communication for you and your neighbors to start talking about it. Secondly, you can share information. Provide your neighbor with easy to read and understand translated material about the hurricane preparedness. As you all know, there are so many multilingual material that created by various agencies from the state level, county level, as well as the federal level. And for your convenience, so my office, we put a lot of translated material on our website. You can feel free to go to our website. And behind you, I see that Haima being a beautiful brochure about the preparedness that in 10 languages, which is the most common languages that speak in the state of Hawaii. So feel free to grab some. If you need more, you can go to our website and print more. And also, you can check in with your neighbor before or after the hurricane. Make sure that they have supply they need or they face any challenges during the preparedness. But the most importantly, I want to take this opportunity for all of us who are part of the government agency and also service provider, as we can also help our neighbor and community by including language access in your communication plan. Language access should not be an afterthought. So any vital information that you prepare for the general public should also be translated into the most common languages spoken in the state of Hawaii. And just keep in mind that some people might not be able to read even in their own languages. So the literacy issue might be one thing that you need to take into consideration. So on top of the written translation, maybe we should think about using another multimedia as a channel of communication, like a PSA, video conference, or video YouTube. I see Haiba have pretty good, funny YouTube hurricane preparedness that people can look into it. So this is one way that we can help our neighbor from both government perspective. I strongly believe that by taking this step, we can help ensure that everyone in our community is prepared and safe. Together, we can make sure that no one is left behind and everyone has the information and support they need to stay safe during the hurricane season. Let's work together to help our neighbors prepare for the hurricane season ahead. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, AP. And next I'll bring up Chris Brenchley, Director of the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. and I'll finally remember to advance the slides. So here you go, Chris.
All right. Thank you, John. And good morning, everyone. Welcome. Aloha. Here we are again. It's good to see so many of you familiar faces here in person. Also know that there are many joining virtually. Really do want to thank and acknowledge all of our partners throughout the government, federal partners, state, county, local, community, our media. Just a fantastic community working together to help our community be resilient during hurricane season. We do this every year. This season outlook, we like to take advantage of that to spread preparedness messages, as well as to give an idea of the prediction for the weather scenario for the coming hurricane season. And I think the thing to really acknowledge and remember is that we're working together all year long to make this make our communities stronger and more resilient. And even though we do this once per year, these activities that we engage in are year round, and strengthening our partnership is very important. The hurricane season outlook is a collaboration with NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. Climate scientists working there have all the tools and expertise needed to see what we're going to have in our long-term forecasts. There's models, there's observations, all of that data that they process give us a glimpse or a probability of what we can see over the coming hurricane season. Working together for that. Should I advance? Okay. There we go. Working together with them, we look at what the patterns might bring for the coming year. This time last year, we were looking at a strong El Nino developing. Recall we had all 2023 hurricane season, El Nino conditions were present. So we were expecting a little bit more activity. We did get 4 tropical cyclones entering into the Central Pacific. One of those cyclones, Hurricane Dora, went all the way across from the East Pacific through the Central Pacific into the West Pacific, which is a pretty rare occurrence. We also had, in addition to the 4 cyclones, there was 2 that were very close to coming into the East Pacific. So overall, we looked at near normal activity last year, even with a strong El Nino. Some of the factors may have also included that there were cooler than normal waters to the east of Hawaii, which sort of helped those additional cyclones from making it further west into our area. So shifting our attention to this season, the current conditions out across the Pacific have made a drastic switch and are continuing to indicate that cooling waters near the equator will result in a La Nina condition, most likely for this hurricane season. So you can see those blue colors along the equator in the eastern Pacific indicating below normal sea surface temperatures. That implication plays into our hurricane season outlook. When we have a La Nina condition, a lot of times there's additional wind shear generated near the state of Hawaii and over the Central Pacific, which has a detrimental effect on tropical cyclones developing. There's the latest outlook. The blue bars show the probability of La Nina developing, and you can see it rapidly ramping up to likely by mid to late summer this season. So the outlook for 2024 for the Central Pacific Hurricane Basin is for a below normal season due to the La Nina condition. We expect 1 to 4 tropical cyclones in the Central Pacific Basin this season. remembering the hurricane season lasts from June 1st through November 30th. And the total number of cyclones that are predicted cover the entire Central Pacific Basin. So there is not a specific indication as to how many of those cyclones would directly impact Hawaii. Tropical cyclones, by definition, include not only hurricanes, but also tropical storms and tropical depressions. These are all different strengths of tropical cyclones that we can see. And one other note, there's some maps from past hurricane seasons where we had below normal tropical cyclone activity, but still had threats to the islands there in 2020. It was below normal season, and yet Hurricane Douglas made a very, very close approach to the state. So important to remember, the numbers don't tell the whole story for the potential for hurricane threat for Hawaii. I appreciate the messages that have been shared about community preparedness. I want to echo those. It's very important to remember everyone, the entire community, as we think about how we're going to prepare to face the potential threat of a hurricane. It's important to prepare for that threat this season and not wait for a season where we expect it to be more active. Any action that you take now, however small, helps the community to be more resilient in the event of a storm impacting the community. It's important to review your emergency action plan and to check your kit to make sure that you have the needed supplies for 14 days. If you need more information, there's a lot of information out online, and we're happy to provide additional information about how to prepare. Together, we look forward to another hurricane season. We look forward to being prepared, and we look forward to facing this potential threat together as a community. And thank you again for your participation today. And I will turn it over to John.
Great. Just to close this out, I wanted to thank you again for joining us to prepare for this hurricane season. As Chris said, even with the below normal activity expected, this is our chance to get ready, because we can't tell you whether the below normal activity will be a 2017 where we barely have anything in the basin, or a 2020 where Douglas skirted by just to our north. I'd like to thank Chris, Kevin, James, AP for joining us and speaking today. And on behalf of them and myself, thank you again. And while I'm holding this,
And that was the 2024 Central Pacific Hurricane Basin outlook from the National Weather Service and the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. Just to recap, they are forecasting for La Nina to return, and this to be more likely a below than average season. So 1 to 4 tropical cyclones in the Central Pacific Basin. They said a 50% chance below normal activity, a 30% chance near normal, and about a 20% chance of above normal. But remember, Guy, this is all, it only takes one storm.
Yep. But it was, pretty much as expected.
Yep.
What we thought was going to happen
Absolutely.
happened. The numbers are fairly low. But like you said, it only takes one, right? So we still should prepare like any season, active or inactive, below average, above average, still prepare as if we were going to get hit, and what you would do to survive 1 week without any help.
Yep, absolutely. Have your hurricanes kits ready. Hurricane season officially starts on June 1st, and the H&N First Alert Weather Team will be airing our hurricane special this upcoming June 4th, and we'll have more information online and throughout all of our evening newscasts later this afternoon and evening. Thank you for joining us. We will continue updating you. You can scan this QR code to go to the H&N Hurricane Center. You can find web stories on how to prepare a hurricane kit and how to be prepared. And we'll be updating this webpage throughout the rest of hurricane season.
Aloha, everybody.